They're doing nothing about it. They can't really do anything about it. There's more small hive beetles than there are bees in here. Like, look. Look at that. Oh my gosh, it's sickening.
The beetle crawls in, can't get back out because the wings are sticking out. They crawl in and can't back up.
The small hive beetles, even if the hive was strong, they somehow would weaken the hive so much that it ended up collapsing.
Hive beetles are the worst. Much worse than mites, much worse than wax moths. Maybe even worse than yellow jackets, which is saying something because they're pretty bad sometimes.
Like, some of these bees are getting angry and they're like trying to attack them. This last year, Kasey and I did a couple different experiments in this yard, Bee Yard 51. And one of those being around a pest that we tend to see in our hives, especially this time of year, the small hive beetle. Never took them seriously until this year, and let me show you why. So if you remember correctly, back in March, Kasey and I brought in 24 pollination hives that we got from California. 2 nights ago, I picked up 6 4-way pallets of these bees. They were overwintered here in Michigan, but sent over to California for almond pollination. So they are absolutely kicking butt. As you can see, there are bees literally going all over the place doing orientation flights. You guys ready for this? Ah! So many bees. And in those hives were quite a bit small hive beetles. But because the hives were really strong, we just thought, hey, okay, the hives are going to do just fine and be able to fend off small hive beetles because they're strong. That is what we've always been taught as the beekeeper in beekeeping, that just keep your colony strong and they can fight off almost anything. So this year we decided to just let them do their thing and take care of the small hive beetles on their own. Well, it turns out that maybe we should have taken small hive beetles a little bit more seriously. Do you see that? Do you see that sliminess? And all of those little worm larva things? I think we know why some of our hives have been dying. And this now proves my theory wrong. Huh? Oh, you're fine, love. So this hive was booming. Okay. Look between those frames. I opened it and there was so many larvae. Like so much larva.
Wax moth or small hive beetle?
Like, it is now getting robbed. Like, look! Look at that! Oh my gosh, it's sickening. They're only on these frames over here. They're doing whatever they can just to survive. Now I want to know what's going on with this hive over here and if they're even okay. Also got I don't think they've gotten stung yet, so the kitties, they're brave. But, so we had a couple of hives collapse this year because of small hive beetles, and originally those hives were ridiculously strong, so we never put in any like beetle blasters or beetle jails. In the past I've used beetle jails before, but the recommended way of attracting the small hive beetles to those jails is using some form of oil and usually some form of like apple cider vinegar, because that smell attracts them. And my thought with this has always been that if you put something in the hive that has that really huge stench to attract them, then that's just going to draw in more small hive beetles to your hive then would have already been there. So we decided to not put anything in our colonies and just keep them strong and let them just try to fight off the small hive beetle and keep them controlled on their own. So I was so surprised when I had a strong colony that just slowly started to dwindle down, and as the small hive beetles got stronger and stronger until they absconded and there was nothing left but small hive beetles. Actually, even in one of the last videos I did with you guys, I didn't even show these hives over here. So it would be a good idea to see what's going on, pop in them, especially since I see some dead bees on the bottom board. That's a little bit alarming this time of year. Yes, you will have a little bit of die off, but maybe not quite that much. All right, so they're not going to be happy that I'm opening them up. Yes, I know, because it's kind of cold, and that's a really tiny cluster. That's actually alarming how small that cluster actually is. So let's take a couple of these frames out and truly see. So obviously, if your cluster is this small as you saw in this hive, then yes, your colony is collapsing. Now it could be collapsing because of mites, could be collapsing if you see a lot of small hive beetles, because I didn't even know until one of you guys commented that, did you guys know that small hive beetles eat the eggs in the colony? I had no idea, so that actually makes so much more sense now why they're able to take over the way that they do. Oh wow, that is a lot of small hive beetle. Like a lot of small hive beetle. Like, I don't think I've ever seen this many small hive beetle. I think that's the problem, guys. You see all of them? Like, that's disgusting. Like, straight disgusting. Why aren't these bees managing that? Holy! Oh my gosh! Guys, look at that. Okay, this is just really insane. Like, what do I even do with this? Do I just, like, leave them to just go crazy on this hive? Like, look how many there are. They're doing nothing about it. They can't really do anything about it. There's more small hive beetles than there are bees in here. They definitely absconded because of small hive beetles. I can guarantee that, because I'm not seeing the queen, but I did see her eggs, so they must have did it recently. It's been warm the last couple days. But, like, do I just leave them? Do I shake them out? No, because then they're just gonna go on the ground. Like, oh my gosh. So, in true Emily fashion, I don't want this to ever happen again. It's so sad to see your hive collapse. So I decided to do a little bit of research and try to learn everything I possibly can about small hive beetles. So let's go over a little bit of the things about them so we can understand how we can get rid of them and to begin with. And the first thing being, small hive beetles never truly originated from the United States. They were introduced to our area in 1996 and originally came from South Africa. So they truly thrive in a hot environment. So in some of those southern states, small hive beetles can be a huge problem because they just keep breeding and breeding and breeding, and there's more life cycles of small hive beetles. So speaking of life cycles, what is the life cycle of a small hive beetle? So first they start out as an egg, and this egg can be laid anywhere in the hive. It doesn't have to be in like a cell, a brood cell or anything. It can be in the crevices of any of the frames. It can be anywhere in the hive. It doesn't have to be anywhere specific. So this is what makes them so dangerous, because they can just come in and start laying eggs like crazy if they want to. Then after that egg hatches, after 2 to 3 days, they become a larva, and then they go into the most destructive phase of their life. This is what generally really sets hives back once they start hatching into larvae. And what happens is, for around 7 to 10 days, that larva then feeds on everything in the colony. So they eat honey, they eat pollen, they eat wax, they eat dead bees, they eat everything in the colony. That whole entire colony is a smorgasbord to them. And this is where you'll see a lot of slime outs where it'll have this terrible stench of fermented honey, and it'll have this slimy goo all over the place, and they just completely wreck your hive in this phase. And the reason they're able to ferment the honey like this is because the larvae, they contain different yeast and enzymes that when they come in contact with the honey, it begins to ferment the honey, because yeast is what you use to start fermenting things, fellow winemaker over here. So when this happens, when that honey starts to ferment, they're able to then attract more small hive beetles to the hive, because other small hive beetles smell this, so they're like, hey, there's a party going on in this hive, so let's go over there and start reproducing and just take advantage of it. Definitely don't want that to happen. Then after that, the larvae go into this sort of wandering phase, and what that is they then begin to wander. That's why it's called wandering, outside of the hive, so that they can then go into the soil and burrow down in there, and that's where they will then start the process to turn into a beetle. So I have personally done this myself, where you go into a colony and you see there's small hive beetles that took over the colony, and there's larvae on the frames. And so you're like, ew, get this larva out of here. And you just start banging the larva on the ground to get it out of the frame. And you're like, okay, they're going to die since they're outside of the hive. This was new news to me when I read this, that we're literally just helping the small hive beetle larva turn into a beetle. So when you go into your colony and you see this larva, don't bang it on the ground, because now those larvae can just go straight into the soil and become the small hive beetle, so that they can then just come right back up and go right back into your hives. So from here on forward, Kasey and I are definitely going to have some form of bucket to put out here, so that we can just shake all of the larvae into that. I did see something by Barnyard Bees a long time ago, that he had this bucket full of like smelly stuff that just attracts a bunch of different pests and kills them before they can get to the beehive. We're definitely going to try this out next year, because I think this may help with small hive beetle a little bit.
And those hive beetles will go in and they will literally drown them. They won't even be able to escape and come back out that way. That might be your better option. It's just an idea. This is something new that I'm kind of experimenting a little bit more and more with.
But after they start coming out of the soil, they come right back up to the hive and they start laying eggs again. They start breeding and they start the next process on the next hive. Now you see why small hive beetles can be so bad. And actually, Ryan Flannery, the podcast I just did with him, he has something very similar to say.
To me, hive beetles are the worst. Much worse than mites, much worse than wax moths. Maybe even worse than yellow jackets, which is saying something, because they're pretty bad sometimes. Yeah. But hive beetles are the toughest and the worst. And you got to take many different avenues to really keep the hive beetles in check. Having a strong hive will help, like you said, but that's not the panacea. I mean, from the time you crack that lid, hive beetles are going to be up on the inside of that lid. You're going to physically smash them. All those adults smash them because they're really hard to kill. They're so hard. You're going to take a look on top of those frames immediately, smash all them. You're going to start working your way down into those frames. And if you have empty frames, and there's like 30 or 40 hive beetles in an empty frame, you're going to take that and get rid of that, because that's nothing but hive beetle heaven right there. So to not have very many empty frames where hive beetles can hive, and you cannot have inner covers when you have hive beetles. Where's the number one place a hive beetle is going to hide? Above the inner cover, in those little cracks around the rim that they can get in to get away from the bees, even though the bees are trying to put them in beetle jail. There's too many hive beetles for them to do that. And then the hive beetles can go down and raid when they want. And they make such a mess in the hive with the honey and their feces and eating through and doing everything. It's horrible. But you have to have full frames, okay, with bees on those frames. They can't be, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to take this super full of drawn wax and put it on top, and then the bees haven't come up to work on it, because that's going to be hive beetle heaven too, because it's a place to hang out and get away from the bees. On top of the inner cover, it's a place to hang out, get away from the bees. So you're creating an environment for those hive beetles. And then you can use other things like beetle blasters with the canola oil in it, or the beetle attractant in your upper boxes in the back, so that beetles get chased into there instead of the upper inner cover, and they get chased in there. But the number one prevention is to kill the hive beetles while they're gestating in the ground. Many of them, most of them, there are some that might stay in a hive over winter if you got nice warm hives, but most of them, they go into the ground for winter and they hibernate there. And then they hatch, they're grubs, and they hatch in the spring and come up into your hive. So if you kill the grubs in the ground around your hive, you're going to have very low hive beetle problems, because you're killing them before they can even hatch, become adults, and go into your hive. And there's chemicals you can use that I try to stay away from them, but I know people that do use them. It's very effective, like Guard Star, and some people use this Grub-X and things like that on the ground all around their hives. But I just use rock salt. I go to the what do you call it? The county road commission.
Oh, yeah.
There's other places that bag rock salt. And there's a couple of places around my area that bag rock salt, and get a bunch of that. And I put it all around my hives. And when you put it all around your hives, you got to make it thick. You got to make it white like snow. And then you got to get it you got to get under your hives, but you got to get out in front of your hives and out behind your hives. And I would say a minimum of 3 feet in front, 3 feet behind, preferably more than that even. But still, it's a lot of rock salt, but rock salt's not expensive. I think it cost me $4 a bag last year.
That's not bad.
And to do all my hives, it only took me like 30 or 40 bags of rock salt. So compared to other things, that's relatively cheap.
So one of the other questions I had is, how does the small hive beetle even find a beehive to begin with? Because if they don't know where they're at, then they shouldn't ever be able to find them, you would think. But actually, small hive beetles also can work off of pheromones the same way that bees do. And every time the colony releases alarm pheromones, this attracts more small hive beetles, because they pick up on that alarm pheromone and they can smell it. So that is what actually draws them to the colony to begin with. That, and smelling that sweet, sweet honey that's on the inside that the bees are making out of the nectar that they're collecting. So because this is our experimental bee yard, we are trying everything we possibly can and everything we can think of just to see what happens. So if you have any other ideas on what we can use to help fend off small hive beetles, definitely throw them our way. But one of the other really cool things that another beekeeper mentioned was using polyester cloth. And let's go over to Ron and see what he has to say.
I don't think it's weak anymore. Does that look weak to all of you? That's hive beetle prevention. It's a biological hive beetle. Polyester. Works pretty good.
It was a 4x4.
And so how does it kill them?
The beetle crawls in, can't get back out because the wings are sticking out. They crawl in and can't back up.
Neat.
I've never heard of that.
Where do you get the polyester from?
Joanne fabric.
Okay, that's awesome. Joanne Fabric, we're here to do.
This is a great way to help with small hive beetles, because one of the main things that really worries me is there are chemical treatments that you can put on your colonies to help with small hive beetles. But I'm not a huge fan of putting chemicals in my hives personally. So I'm always looking for ways to fight off small hive beetles before they even enter the hive to begin with. Using the polyester cloth and putting it on the bottom board is great for as soon as the small hive beetle enters, they go to that cloth and they get stuck. That way they're not able to go up and start laying eggs like when you put in a beetle jail. Usually you tend to put it at the top of your beehive, so the small hive beetle has to walk through the whole entire hive before they even get to the jail to begin with. So along the way, they could have laid a bunch of eggs to start off the next offspring. So let's talk about these two hives right here for 1 second. So these two hives, if you remember, were absolutely booming with bees. They were so strong all year and just kicking butt. And then all of a sudden, the small hive beetles began to come out of the ground because they usually tend to start to hatch in the late summer. That's why fall time is the worst time for small hive beetles in our colonies. And when that happened, they just started going straight into the colony. And to my surprise, that is actually what ended up making them collapse. And you can actually see right here, there's some dead small hive beetles right here on the top bars. Luckily, when this colony died, the small hive beetles die with it because there's no longer a way to keep the hive warm, and small hive beetles, they don't do very well in the cold. So because small hive beetles aren't a fan of the cold, this is why you'll see a lot of people say in order to keep the small hive beetle numbers down, it's best to have your hives located somewhere that has 75% sun. Because when the hive environment is a little bit warmer, the small hive beetles don't really thrive in that area. But as you see, we have our hives located here in the middle of the woods. We do have some trees that have been falling down, so we're getting a lot more sunlight into the area. But there is still a lot of leaf cover on the ground and just perfect cold soil for these small hive beetles to just start reproducing and start coming up in that late summertime. So I've always said that your hive is not going to die because of small hive beetles unless it was really weak. Well, every single one of these hives was crazy strong. And now I'm seeing that this is why some of these hives have been dying, because the small hive beetle got out of hand. So like we mentioned before, this is our experimental yard. That's why we call it Bee Yard 51. So if you have any ideas on different experiments that you want to see happen, but you're too afraid to try them out on your hives, shoot them our way and we will try them next year and start planning those all out. Small hive beetles is going to be a really big one. We're going to be trying rock salt. We're going to try the polyester cloth as well. And any other cool ideas that you guys throw our way, we will also be trying those for small hive beetles. So if you want to see the results for this, make sure you hit the subscribe button because there's going to be a lot of info coming on all of that. But thank you so much for being with us here today and seeing the bee yard right now as it is. It's been a weird year. We've had some weird weather as it seems to always be changing. Usually it's a little bit colder this time of year, but it's been fairly warm, which is not necessarily the best thing for our bees because now they're burning through more sugar stores, more honey stores. So we'll see how the rest of the winter goes. But that's it for me today. Thank you for following along and don't quit and be fit. Oh, and merch is dropping on December 1st, so mark your calendars because it's coming really quick. That's only in a couple weeks actually, just in time for the holidays, and I'm so excited to see it on every single one of you because I've been wearing them all and they are so freaking comfy. But all right, bye.